Maggie. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these.
God, whose simple name means something like the one that exists, emerged from the sands of Bronze Age obscurity to eventually become not just a national god, but, in the end, simply the God for the overwhelming majority of the world's population now. But just how did a tribal warrior storm god, Yahweh, go from being a god, a minor god, among gods much more ancient and much more powerful, enduring up till then at least, to simply becoming God?
Hi, everybody. Great question, huh? Let's read this together. Quote, "As it is, you are looking for a way to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. Abraham did not do such things. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth because there is no truth to him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of lies." That is a quote from Jesus of Nazareth, Book of Matthew, chapter 8, verses 40 to 44, speaking to the Jews. So we're going to talk about it. Let me say hi to some people here real quick. Adric is first. He says, "It's on." Armando is here with the peace sign. Cosmic Surfer, first in class. Adrian says, "Let's go." And Leon is here. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So for thousands of years, we have been told that the gods of the ancient world were destroyed, that Yahweh defeated Baal, that monotheism replaced paganism, that we, the modern world, are free. But what if this is the greatest lie ever told? What if the gods of old never disappeared, but were simply absorbed into political monotheism, eaten? Parts were taken, and the rest was demonized. From the crumbling ruins of ancient Canaan to the towering skyscrapers of Wall Street, a hidden system of power has persisted for millennia. But what if the very structure of our global dominion, spiritual, political, and economic, was built on a secret pact among the Abrahamic faiths? What if the system that subjugates women, targets the spiritual legacy of Africa, and plugs all modern peoples into wage slavery is not accidental, but an intentional design to preserve Yahweh worship? So, who were some of the first eaten? That would be Sin and Baal. Not the first, some of the first. To understand how Sin and Baal still rule over us, right? Because they are eaten, they are absorbed, some of it is taken into the idea of Yahweh, and the rest is demonized. We have to understand who they were. In the ancient world, two gods ruled over time and wealth. One was Sin, the god of the moon, time, and financial order. The other was Baal, the god of storms, fertility, war, and economic prosperity. Together, they formed the backbone of civilization, controlling the cycles of time and the flow of wealth. Baal relied on Sin to structure his power. Agriculture, which was Baal's domain, needed the lunar calendar, Sin's domain, to track planting and harvesting cycles. Sin ensured kings ruled under divine timing, while Baal ensured their financial and military success. Sin was the Mesopotamian god of the moon, time, and economic cycles. He was worshipped in Haran, Arabia, and Canaan, all areas that later became centers of Judaism and Islam. Sin's priests controlled time itself, creating calendars, tracking debt cycles, and setting the dates for financial and religious events. Sin was the god of divine contracts, ensuring the laws of debt, servitude, and sacrifice remained binding. If you control time, you control society. Sin's priests dictated when debts were due, when kings could rise, and when sacrifices must be made. Even today, we still follow Sin's system. Our financial crashes, our religious holidays, and our global economies are still bound to this same lunar cycle. Baal, that's the Shemitah cycle that shows that our crashes line up with the Jewish sin cycle. Okay. Baal was the god of storms, fertility, war, and economic prosperity. And no, Dr. Jeju pitches. I don't know how to say that. That is not what that means. Hi, y'all, Borgen. Thanks for being here. So Baal, his bull iconography symbolized strength and financial power, just like Wall Street's charging bull today. Kings and merchants worshipped Baal to secure wealth, victory in battle, and economic dominance. Baal was a transactional god. He demanded sacrifice in exchange for material success. So how do we know that Sin and Baal go together? There is ancient evidence of the connection between Sin and Baal. Sin and Baal were worshipped together in all the major temples. Sin's temple in Haran, dating back to at least 2000 BCE, was one of the most powerful religious centers in Mesopotamia. Inscriptions indicate that Sin shared worship spaces with Baal Hadad, a local version of Baal. Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian kings worshipped both Sin and Baal, often invoking their joint power over time, Sin, and fertility and war, Baal. The Ugaritic Baal cycle, discovered in the ruins of Ugarit, reveals Baal's reliance on the moon's cycles for his battles, rainmaking, and fertility rites. Baal's role as the lord of storms and agriculture was closely tied to the lunar calendar, which was governed by Sin. Temple inscriptions at Ugarit mention both Baal and Sin as part of the same divine system. The name Sin, just like we think, S-I-N, appears in Semitic languages, influencing later religious traditions. This is where we get the name for the Sinai Peninsula, which was named after the moon god Sin. This is where we get Sinim in Isaiah 49:12, which is a kind of an obscure reference that is linked to lunar-based religious traditions. And it's also where we get the name synagogue. That's how it's spelled in Israel, S-I-N, synagogue. Many Semitic inscriptions found in northern Arabia depict Sin and Baal as complementary deities. Ancient temples, inscriptions, and linguistic evidence confirm that Sin and Baal were worshipped together across Mesopotamia, Canaan, and Arabia. So let's talk about religious syncretism. Baal's cycles of death and rebirth were aligned with Sin's lunar phases, symbolizing a hidden cosmological partnership. The Akkadian, Babylonians, and later the Assyrians synthesized Sin and Baal into the same religious framework. which was later absorbed by Canaanite and Aramaic traditions. That's what syncretism means. It's where we kind of merge things together. In Haran and Sin was seen as a divine ruler who decreed the fate of kings, while Baal was invoked to secure material prosperity and war victories. So there are biblical references, right? We have the golden calf, which is Baal. That's in Exodus 32 and 1 Kings 12. The bull was a primary symbol of Baal, but it also had lunar connotations because of the crescent horns resembling the moon. When the Israelites worshipped the golden calf, they had been honoring both Baal and Sin, carrying forward that hidden partnership. Moon worship was condemned alongside Baal worship. In the Hebrew Bible, it frequently condemns worship of the moon, Baal, and the Queen of Heaven. That's in Jeremiah 7 and 44. This suggests that the Israelites were exposed to a combined religious system that included Baal and Sin worship, and that they struggled to give it up. The fact that Sin and Baal worship coexisted in ancient Near Eastern temples and were condemned together in the Bible suggests that they were often worshipped as part of the same system. Baal was the god of deals, the one who promised power and fortune in exchange for loyalty. But to keep the system running, he required human sacrifice. Baal worship never really stopped. It was just eaten by Yahweh. There's so many parts of Yahweh and Sin that are still utilized today in our religious system. Today, we still sacrifice lives for economic gain, whether through endless wars, debt slavery, or the prison industrial complex. The system never changed. It was simply given new names. The Bible tells us that Yahweh defeated Baal, that monotheism replaced the pagan gods, but history tells a totally different story. The Israelites did not emerge from nowhere. They were originally Canaanites, people who had worshipped El, Baal, and Sin, not Yahweh. It was the Shasu that worshipped Yahweh. The Shasu were a nomadic tribe. Yahweh was considered a lesser god, as we heard in the video in the beginning. The Bible itself admits that Abraham, the father of monotheism, came from a city dedicated to the moon god Sin. Genesis 11 talks about Abraham coming from one of the main centers of Sin worship. In Judges 2, the Israelites forsook Yahweh and served Baal and Ashtaroth. In Exodus 32 and 1 Kings, they talk about the golden calf. This resembles Baal worship, but also Sin's lunar bull image, right? Instead of eliminating Sin and Baal, the ruling priesthood rebranded them under Yahweh's name, ensuring their systems remain intact. We know that religious systems have done that in more recent history, right? We look at the Easter bunny, the Christmas tree. The way to get people converted is to absorb a lot of what they believe and leave the rest. So we know that they do this. So why, though, was Yahweh, an obscure storm god, elevated above Baal and Sin? Because he was a perfect tool for this rebranding. Yahweh could be shaped, militarized, and used as a means of control, while the real power of time and wealth remained hidden in the background. Sin and Baal were co-opted by Yahweh. Judaism and Islam follow Sin's lunar system. Both religions use a lunar calendar, a remnant of Sin's timekeeping control. The Rosh Chodesh, which is the Jewish new moon festival, and Ramadan, an Islamic holy month, show the continued worship of the moon cycle. Islam's crescent moon symbol directly links to sin, right? Christianity and capitalism worship Baal through Mammon. So let's look at the definition of Mammon. This is a biblical term for riches, often used to describe the debasing influence of material wealth. The term was used by Jesus in his famous Sermon on the Mount and also appears in the Gospel according to Luke. The prosperity gospel teaches a transactional relationship with God, identical to Baal's demands for sacrifices in exchange for blessings. Corporate and political leaders function as Baalic kings, ensuring economic domination through war and labor. The political use of Christianity, where religious rhetoric is leveraged for dominance, war, and control, bears striking similarities to how ancient rulers used Baal worship to justify their power. Jay says, seems like a grudge against God by the lady host, though I am in no position to judge such a grudge nor to defend or redeem God. This sentiment is based on intuition and impression. I, just so that we're very clear, do not have a grudge against God. I have a grudge against the use of Yahweh being rebranded by political leaders and used to control humanity. So I have nothing against God. Haven't even talked about God yet. So modern military conflicts mirror Baalic war rituals where blood sacrifice ensures continued dominance. The Bible frequently warns against idolatry, but idolatry isn't just about statues. It's about misplaced devotion. When religious groups elevate political figures, economic prosperity, or even their own church institutions above ethical teachings, they may be engaging in a modern form of Baal worship. The golden calf incident wasn't just about worshiping a statue. It was about trying to redefine God in their own terms, which is exactly what modern religious movements do. Adrian says, looks like the sentiment is based upon research. Yes. Prime 6 at Napistim. There is going to be a video about Enki and Enlil and Utnapishtim, also known as Noah. So there will be a video about them. Some might argue that calling oneself Christian automatically means they're following Christ. But history shows names don't always reflect substance. And we all know some people who say they are Christian and don't behave as such. And in case anybody missed it, there was a quote from Jesus at the very beginning of this video. Many ancient Israelites continued calling themselves Yahweh worshipers while integrating all the Baal elements through syncretism. The same can be said of modern religious movements that claim Christianity, but operate in ways that are fundamentally opposed to Christ's teachings. There is a strong historical argument. So here's we talk about research that Rome, in codifying Christianity, infused it with elements of Baal worship by aligning it with imperial power, materialism, and hierarchical control. All things that Jesus preached against, right? Imperial power, materialism, and hierarchical control. But that's what we have. So we can break it down step by step. After Jesus's death, Christianity was initially a decentralized, persecuted grassroots movement. But by the time of Emperor Constantine, early in the 4th century of the Common Era, Rome saw the political advantage of controlling the growing Christian movement. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE was not about pure theological debate. It was about standardizing Christian belief under the authority of the Roman Empire and not in Kemet. So the two central authorities of Christianity were in Kemet, Egypt, okay, and in Rome. Rome wanted the state religion. So this meant selecting which texts were official and which were heretical, shaping Christian doctrine to serve imperial interests. This is why the Torah is in the Christian Bible, even though Jesus preached against all of it. Again, I hearken you back to the quote in the beginning. If Rome wanted Christianity to remain a tool of state control, it had every reason to integrate elements of Baal worship. Since Baal had historically been a state-sanctioned god of empire, power, and hierarchy, the Romans didn't just tolerate Baal worship in their provinces, they absorbed it. Baal was often syncretized with Jupiter as Jupiter Dolicinus and other Roman deities, meaning the idea of a dominant, prosperity-granting god was already compatible with Roman religious structure. And this is the structure we have in Christianity today. Yahweh was the perfect vessel for rebranding because he was obscure enough to be molded, yet militaristic enough to maintain control. The real power came from sin through time and finance, and Baal, wealth and power. But Yahweh's elevation allowed a seemingly new God to take center stage while preserving the old structures in disguise. And then they could demonize sin and Baal, eat the fish and demonize the bones. Yahweh was a lesser storm god in early Israelite religion. Archaeological evidence shows that Yahweh was a minor deity. Early Israelites were Canaanites who originally worshipped El, the high god, and Baal, the storm and fertility god. Yahweh's earliest mentions appear alongside other gods, suggesting he was a regional storm god rather than a supreme deity. And he was a god over the Shasu, nomads. And when we talk about storms, these are like desert storms, but not, big disastrous storms, just desert storms. Yahweh's storm and war attributes kind of resembled Baal, just on a lesser scale. In early biblical texts, Yahweh is described as a storm god with lightning, thunder, and warlike tendencies. I'm going to lose my voice already. Okay. Yahweh thunders from heaven. The Most High utters his voice. That's in 2 Samuel. Jay says, my sentiment, I meant now hearing the issues. And again, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Our grievances the reaction to righteous indignation, or could they be from sanctimony, ape logic? Well, we'll find out. The voice of Yahweh is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. So this is how he was described. These descriptions are almost identical to Baal attributes in Ugaritic texts. Almost identical. Okay, reinforcing that Yahweh was originally a minor war storm deity in the same mold as Baal. Early Yahweh was not the one true God. He was just one of many localized storm gods worshipped by nomadic tribes. So let's talk about the rebrand. Yahweh eats Baal, El, and sin. El was his father. All right. If Yahweh was a minor storm god, then why did he become the supreme deity of the Bible? The answer lies in religious consolidation and political power. So Yahweh takes over Baal's role. When the Israelites broke from mainstream Canaanite religion, they needed a war god to unify their identity. War and storm deity seems to fit well with the Shasu. Yes, because I will hearken people back to my Shasu show. These were people you could hire as mercenaries. So it fits well with them. Okay. So when the Israelites broke from mainstream Canaanite religion, they needed a war god to unify their identity. Instead of continuing to worship Baal, who was dominant in Canaan, they adopted Yahweh, a lesser, more obscure god, and assigned him Baal's warlike characteristics. The Bible demonizes Baal repeatedly, suggesting a deliberate rebranding effort. So, in Judges, they forsook Yahweh and served Baal, and Ashtaroth, his mother. Do not call me Baal, but call me Ishi in Hosea. So Baal didn't disappear. His attributes were transferred to Yahweh, allowing the same militaristic, wealth-driven system to remain intact under a new regime. Jay says, yes, I don't mean to diminish. It's hard to respect religion because we seek first principles to ballast our own limitations of individualistic ego and meaning derivement. Could be. So right now we're just talking about history. So Yahweh also takes over El's role as the supreme God. In early Israelite religion, El was the high God, the highest of high God, and Yahweh was just one of his lesser sons. By some accounts, Yahweh was number 13 of El's sons. Over time, Yahweh was merged with El, a clear rebranding. If we look in Deuteronomy, Elyon gave the nations their inheritance. Yahweh's portion was his people. That was in Deuteronomy, right? And Yahweh was the only God who didn't get a land. He just got some folks. So maybe he was irritated. This gradual process erased El as a separate figure and made Yahweh the sole deity. So by eating El, Yahweh absorbed the authority of an older high god while maintaining Baal's warrior attributes.
Yahweh would assimilate aspects of Baal. The archaic version of Psalm 29 has been taken by many scholars to be literally a hymn to Baal, with Yahweh's name just sort of cut and pasted into that poem, especially the language and theology around the storm theophany. And yet, at the same time, Yahwist would, given the Freudian narcissism of minor difference at work here, pitch Baal and Yahweh in prophetic combat, most famously in the Elijah cycle at 1 Kings 18.
Them. So what God is basically saying here in Deutero-Isaiah is, don't you go attributing your salvation and your well-being to other gods. There's no one else but me.
Yeah.
And this is kind of abusive rhetoric that you might get from a domestic partner.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So what he was referencing there was when Yahweh was talking, it was like, don't look at them, look at me. You don't pay attention to these other gods, you look at me. There's nobody here but me. Okay, so the hidden role. I do have up here the Oedipus complex because if you guys know the Oedipus complex, Oedipus killed his father to marry his mother. And so when Yahweh merged with El, it was a clear rebrand, right? He killed his father. Okay. So, but he could maintain Baal's warrior attributes. Okay. So while Yahweh officially replaced Baal and El, the system of lunar timekeeping controlled by sin remained intact. The Jewish calendar is entirely lunar, showing that the ancient structures of sin's influence never disappeared. The Bible is full of moon-based laws, suggesting that sin's influence was hidden, again, under Yahweh's name. Sin wasn't erased. His system of control, timekeeping, and finance was just folded into the Yahweh worship. But again, why Yahweh? If Baal and sin were more powerful, why would we choose Yahweh? The answer is control and plausible deniability. Yahweh was easier to manipulate. Not that many people had heard of him. Baal and sin kind of had too much baggage. They had been worshipped for thousands of years across multiple civilizations. Everybody knew who they were. Okay. Yahweh, on the other hand, was regional. He was obscure, which meant he could be reshaped without resistance. This made Yahweh the perfect vessel for rebranding, allowing the old gods to continue their influence under a new identity. Yahweh was a war god, perfect for political control. The ruling elite needed a god that justified military conquest, hierarchy, and obedience. Yahweh's warlike nature, which he inherited from Baal, made him ideal for establishing kings, law codes, and religious domination. Yahweh's covenant system, obey or be punished, reinforced strict political control, just like Baal's transactional worship model. Again, obey or be punished. It's the same. Yahweh wasn't chosen for his spiritual qualities. He was chosen because he could be militarized and controlled. Yahweh allowed for a smooth transition into monotheism. If Baal or sin had been elevated as the supreme god, it would have been too obvious that old pagan systems were still in place. Baal and sin were also older sons of El. Instead, Yahweh was gradually merged with El and stripped of any polytheistic references, making it seem like a new and revolutionary god had just emerged. Hi, Rael. Jay says, so then we see the flaws of the world and of ourselves and others. And so then, like an addict, it's hard to properly trust one's perception not to be engaged in some escapism or misstep. Either way. If Baal or sin had been elevated as the supreme god, it would have been too obvious that old pagan systems were still in place. Instead, Yahweh was gradually merged with El and stripped of the polytheistic references, right? So now we have his name is Yahweh. Remember? Moses went, right? El and he said, I am that I am. What is it? Yahweh or something like that. I'm Yahweh, right? But he said, El Shaddai, the destroyer. I am the destroyer. This trick allowed the elite priesthood to maintain power while fooling people into thinking they had abandoned idolatry. It's not polytheistic. We're just going to take all these attributes and put it under one person. So when Christianity was adopted by Rome, right, was it truly transformed into a faith centered on Jesus, or was it molded into something closer to its roots? Power-based worship. Again, harken back to that quote from Jesus. One of the biggest contradictions in Christian theology is the inclusion of the Torah, what we call the Old Testament, as part of the Christian Bible, despite Jesus fulfilling and even critiquing Mosaic law. The Torah establishes a strict legal system with a heavy emphasis on laws, sacrifices, and priestly authority. So, if Jesus came to replace the legalistic religion with direct spiritual connection, why did Rome keep the Torah? The Torah reinforced hierarchical control. It justified legalism and obedience to religious authorities and divine right to rule. This legalism is consistent with Baal worship, where priests and rulers dictated rituals to maintain social order and state power. By including the Torah, Rome ensured Christianity retained the rigid structure of Old Testament law rather than the spiritual liberation that Jesus preached. Was it intentional? Well, if we assume that the Roman elite were aware of the political benefits of Baal worship, because they used it, they had historically adopted aspects of it into their own pantheon, Jupiter Dolichinas. Then the elements of Baalic structure were deliberately maintained within Christianity because they could maintain political control through state religion. Rome didn't want Christianity as a revolutionary grassroots movement. It wanted a version of Christianity that upheld empire, centralized control, and had material wealth. By fusing elements of Baal worship, hierarchical power, wealth accumulation, and state-aligned religion, Rome ensured Christianity would serve as a tool of control rather than a challenge to empire. They needed to take control before Kemet did.
For centuries, the Catholic Church has been a monumental pillar of human history. From the echoing halls of the Vatican to the humblest of rural chapels, its influence has permeated every corner of the globe. But it is also a powerful financial institution, with the world's largest real estate collections and vested interests in a vast number of corporations.
The Vatican owns more than 5,000 church and investment properties around the world, a central office at the Catholic Church revealed for the first time Saturday, according to several news outlets.
So, Rome's version of Christianity, which became the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church, retained significant structural and ideological elements of Baal worship. In ancient Canaan, Baal was revered as the god of fertility, storms, and material abundance. Yes, Adrian, i.e., render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Yes. Hi, grab second gear, Eddie. Is that the Tower of Babel or the Tower of Basil? Jay. So in ancient Canaan, Baal was revered as the god of fertility, storms, and material abundance. His symbols, most notably the bull, became emblems of strength and prosperity. Later, as the Roman Empire absorbed diverse traditions, two syncretic deities emerged: Jupiter Dolichinas, fusing Jupiter's imperial authority with the ancient attributes of Baal, and Saturnus, fusing Saturn's rule of time with sin's time cycles and fate. The church's emphasis on hierarchy, material wealth, and legalistic doctrine mirrors ancient traditions much more than the teachings of Jesus. So, the God worshipped in the Abrahamic traditions isn't the God known as Yahweh, but a rebranded version of Baal, one that prioritizes power over justice, obedience over personal transformation, and empire over liberation. Hi, Addo Art. If Judaism, Christianity, and Islam were meant to oppose each other, why do we find so many examples of cooperation when it comes to power and wealth? The Vatican's financial deals with Jewish bankers in the medieval and Renaissance era were numerous. While Catholic doctrine publicly condemned usury, meaning charging interest, Jewish leaders were allowed to operate it. The Medici and the Rothschilds banking families had close ties to both the Catholic Church and European monarchies, maintaining financial stability for the elites. Pope John Paul II formally acknowledged Jewish economic influence in 1993, proving the long-standing financial ties. Christianity outwardly condemned Jewish money lending, but secretly relied on it to maintain power. That sounds like a coordinated economic system. Then we have Islamic banking's role in the global financial system. The petrodollar agreement in 1973 linked oil sales controlled by Muslim-majority nations to the U.S. dollar, the U.S. being kind of ground zero of Christianity right now, essentially making Islamic wealth dependent on Western finance. The Bank of England, the IMF, and other major financial institutions operate in ways that align with Islamic financial laws, ensuring economic cooperation. Despite Islamic bans on usury, called the riba, Middle Eastern countries participate in debt-based global finance, reinforcing the same economic control system. Islam claims to reject Western financial systems, yet it plays a key role in maintaining the debt-based economic order that benefits the global elites. So let's talk about the Abraham Accords and the unification of power. Adrian says, thus linking modern capitalism to church control. Absolutely. I'm glad you're hearing that because that's where I'm going. So the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations, strengthening economic and military ties between Judaism and Islam. The Vatican has publicly endorsed interfaith dialogue, promoting Abrahamic unity while maintaining its own wealth. The U.S., which is a Christian-dominated government, orchestrated these deals, ensuring that despite religious differences, economic and political control remains centralized amongst these Abrahamic religions and nobody else. So we can infer all this stuff, but what do we see with our own eyes? So let's talk about the bull symbolism, Baal and Jupiter Dolikinus, Jupiter, right? Baal was often associated with bulls as symbols of strength, fertility, and rulership. Jupiter Dolikinus, which was the Roman fusion of Jupiter and Baal, was always depicted standing on a bull, symbolizing dominion over earthly power. So where do we see this today? Wall Street, the Wall Street bull, right? Upper left there. The charging bull statue in New York represents financial power, prosperity, and market dominance, directly linking capitalism to the bull, to Baal. That's exactly Baal worship. Baal was worshipped for material wealth and prosperity. It's the same thing. Even stock market terminology, a bull market is one in which economic growth is aggressive and dominant, aligning with Baal's role as the god of abundance. We can look at corporate logos. Many powerful companies use bull imagery to signify strength and authority. Think about Lamborghinis. They have a bull emblem, right? Then we have the double lightning symbol, which is Jupiter and Baal. Jupiter Dolikinus, like Zeus and Baal Hadad, was a sky god, wielding a double thunderbolt, symbolizing divine authority and destructive power. Oh, Merrill Lynch, yes. And Leon said it's why they wanted North Africa so bad, centered on Morocco. Yes. So, the double thunderbolt. So where do we see this today? Military and government symbols. We've also seen it somewhere else, where we saw the double thunderbolt. You guys know where we saw that. The double lightning bolt is seen in many military insignias, especially in Western military forces. There's the other one, we call them the SS, right? They used stylized lightning bolt symbols, reinforcing the association of thunderbolts with authoritarian rule. That's what it is. NATO and various government agencies use similar motifs in their designs. Yes, Adrian, yes, thank you. Well, we will just call them the SS. All right. So energy companies, electrical firms, and even entertainment brands use lightning bolts to signify power and control. Does lightning in and of itself just inherently say power and control? No. But we use lightning bolts because it harkens back to power and control of these gods. Okay. The Tesla logo. Same thing. So let's talk about the eagle symbolism. So this is Jupiter and imperial power. Jupiter's primary symbol in Rome was the eagle, representing supreme authority, empire, and divine right of rule. So where do we see this today? National seals. The United States, Germany, and several Western nations use the eagle as a symbol of power and control, directly inherited from Rome. The American bald eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch is essentially a modern version of the Roman eagle under Jupiter's dominion. This is Jupiter. This is all his. Yeah, Adrian says Zeus, the god of lightning, and Thor, the god of thunder. It's everywhere. Yes. Yes. And it's authority, divine authority. Okay. So the American bald eagle clutching the arrows, right? Like that is exactly Jupiter. That is a Jupiter. We also see the eagle in military insignias. So many elite military units like the U.S. Navy SEALs and the Special Forces incorporate eagles into their symbols. Banks, insurance companies, and government institutions frequently use eagle imagery to signal strength and authority. Again, banks, insurance companies, and government institutions. All right, so let's talk about the obelisk and sun worship. So we're hearkening back to Baal Hadad and the Roman Jupiter. Baal was closely associated with sun worship, and the Romans adopted the Egyptian obelisk as a symbol of power. So where do we see this today? The Washington Monument. The tallest structure in DC is an obelisk, originally an Egyptian religious symbol tied to sun worship and divine rulership. It was taken and repurposed because then we have the Vatican obelisk. In St. Peter's Square, we feature a massive obelisk linking the Catholic Church's power structure to the ancient solar religious tradition. We took it, it's ours now. So we're going to put it out in St. Peter's Square. But they're also in these specific major city centers that denote where the power and control is. Paris in the Place de la Concorde, in London at Cleopatra's Needle, and other major cities have obelisks prominently displayed in the government districts. The worship of material wealth and power, this is Baal's influence, and where we get capitalism. Then he says phallic idols. They are that as well, but it harkens back to sun worship. It's a tower to the sun. So Baal worship was centered on fertility, material gain, and state power, qualities that align eerily well with modern capitalism. So where do we see this today? Banks and government buildings resemble the temple. Many financial institutions have Greco-Roman architectural features, including massive columns and domed ceilings, evoking the grand temples of Baal and Jupiter. We see corporate power as a divine right. The wealthiest elites are often treated as near deities. This is that billionaire worship I've talked about before. Their words are treated as gospel. Think about Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, or political dynasties like the Bushes and the Clintons. We think just because they have money, anything they say is, their mouth to God's ear, right? Then we have the worship of money and the markets. The global economy operates almost religiously, with faith placed in fiat currencies, market cycles, and consumerism, resembling the transactional nature of ancient Baal worship, where prosperity was granted in exchange for devotion or sacrifice. right? Praise, 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 and worship and sacrifice. Then that's how we get the prosperity gospel. The symbols and themes of Baal and Jupiter Dolichinas are deeply embedded in Western society, from the financial sector to military insignias, from national symbols to corporate branding. The motifs of bulls, lightning bolts, eagles, obelisks, and material worship dominate our world. Sin and Baal never really disappeared. They were digested in a religious power grab. Yahweh became the mask for a system that still operates under their rule. If the Abrahamic religions secretly uphold the same ancient system, we'd expect a symbolic continuity across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as well. So we have the obelisk connection, Baal's symbol of dominion. In Vatican City, St. Peter's Square has the Egyptian obelisk. We talked about that. In Washington, D.C., we have the same symbols reinforcing U.S. global dominance. And in Mecca, we have the Kaaba, the black cube, resembling not Jupiter, but Saturn, another name for El, the high god that was absorbed by Baal. The world's three major religious power centers all feature symbols of ancient dominion, proving that their real allegiance may not be to their claimed God. But what about the all-seeing eye, right? Or the eye of providence, as they call it. Guess what it was very, very first called, the first time we saw this? It was called the omnipresence of Baal. In Judaism, Kabbalistic mysticism uses the eye as a symbol of divine surveillance. In Christianity, the US dollar, again, a Christian-led government, features the eye of providence, right? Symbolizing Baal's control on money, which is Baal's domain. In Islam, the eye of Dajjal, which is the Islamic Antichrist, is a key symbol of deception, yet the same imagery appears in their global finance. They're putting the eye on everything. The persistence of divine surveillance, these symbols, suggest that all three religions secretly uphold Baal's omnipresence. How do they do that? Well, you're going to have to come to part 2 to find out. Also, at the end of there's going to be more videos, but also at the end of part 2, we are going to have all of the references and citations that I've talked about in part 1 and part 2. It's several pages long, but I will play it during the video so people can screenshot or whatever they would like to do to have a list of those references and citations. So we will talk more next Sunday when we do part 2 of Under the Dominion, where we're under God, indivisible. Wasn't that I in the Lord of the Rings movie? Yes. The omnipresence, the surveillance. Yes. So I hope you all can join for part 2. This coming Wednesday, we're going to keep doing the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch, which, really presses Yahweh. And we're getting into it and finding out that what they're talking about isn't cool. But it's fun to take this very esoteric book and make it not soteric. So we're having fun with that. Not this coming Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that. I'm actually going to expand on Jupiter a little bit, Jupiter Dolichinas, as part of the keys, because it gets brought up. So we'll talk about it. Otherwise, I hope to see you guys next Sunday. Let's see, before I forget, I love you, I miss you, and you're my favorite. Now I'm going to show you a picture of my dog. Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out some of the wilder Pivot Point Wednesday shows. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not soteric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. By subscribing, you'll join a community that thrives on curiosity and growth, and you'll never miss out on insights and some wild discussions. Let's uncover the universe together.